I'm Takis Metaxas, and let me tell you a few things I know about fake news that has attracted so much attention lately. So very often people are arguing what exactly is fake news, and there are competing definitions, confusing the topic. But to me, fake news are lies that are usually presented in such a way that it appears as a news article, and they rely on people's inability to really discern what is true and what is not. And when this happens, some people might get themselves into trouble. This slide is about the infamous Pizzagate that I suspect you have heard. Supposedly there was a pedophile ring at the basement of a pizza place in Washington, D.C. Hillary Clinton was supposedly associated with that. Somebody believed this and found out the hard way that believing lies can be dangerous. He got arrested, he's facing charges, and at least he didn't kill anybody. He shot, but he didn't kill anybody. So believing lies is an old problem. It's not something very recent. This goes back to tell something about my background. I come from Greece, and so we studied quite a bit the rise of Athenian democracy, but also the fall of the Athenian democracy. And it turns out that there was this good-looking man by the name of Alcibiades who believed some fake news, that people in Sicily, in the Sicilian towns, were really not competent about fighting, and most of the cities will actually join the Athenians. There was no risk at invading. And they found out the hard way that that was not the case. That was kind of the end of the Athenian democracy, because after this defeat, nothing went the right way for them. And I find also interesting that at the end of his speech, Alcibiades was trying to encourage the Athenians to join the cause. And he says, remember our fathers. We want to actually make Athens as great as it used to be. For some reason, kind of strike a chord that maybe we're living similar times. Anyway, so people are talking about fake news and what we can do about that nowadays. You find some guides and you say you have to really be careful. You have to check this. You have to check that. Facebook, who had a hand actually in the proliferation of fake news in the last elections, a couple days ago came up with a long list of what you should do about fake news. And this is the beginning of my screen on the iPhone, and it's going on and on and on. Nowhere in there seems that technology is involved. And this is funny because you see Facebook, several months before the elections, had an editorial team to check for possible fake news. And at some point, they abolished the team. They relied completely on AI, and they found out the very hard way that AI actually is not that good at this stage. We cannot really tell what is true and what is not. And you probably are aware of the consequences of all of these things. I got interested in the problem of actually how difficult it is to find information, or how easy it is to find information years ago. This is a paper I wrote with a student of mine in 2002 with this catchy title, Of Course It's True, I Saw It on the Internet, because for my father, the proof that something was true had to do with the newspaper. If it is printed, that's it. And I was finding that our students actually could not make the change between the times in which everything that was written was kind of reliable because there was an editor, and they were confusing their ability to discover something doing search. At that time, Google was still at the very early stages, but the ease at which they would find information, they thought that this is really the answer. And in fact, Google was encouraging this kind of temptation that if you can find an answer, that is the answer, because to this day, this is a snapshot I just yesterday, Google had a big white screen and it had two buttons, one of which is I'm feeling lucky. And when you are feeling lucky, you're really getting the first result of all the searches that has done for you. So there are 5 million documents, but it is the top one that will give you the answer. So Google has tried to encourage us to think that they can find the answer. Only it's not the case all the time. So back in 2004, I was doing some searches to find information, and I started discovering there is misinformation on the web. By now, it's like, oh, really? But back then, it didn't seem to be the case. It seems that Google would give you the answer every time until you start looking at topics which were actually spam. The word that we use for that, you may be familiar, is web spam. Essentially, you're fooling Google in such a way that eventually the users of the web will be fooled. So looking for human growth hormone, my results were saying that pretty much with $39.95, any of these links, $39.95 a month, you will be taller, thinner, more handsome, more sexy, probably more wealthy, you name it, you will be that. And it, eventually Google paid dearly, about $500 million for this kind of results, but this came years later. But any kind of controversial issue was targeted. Here is whether the answer to the question whether ADHD is a real disease, and all the results tell you that it is actually a conspiracy by psychiatrists to drug our kids. So there is, I got very interested in these, and then when I started looking deeper about what is the case, why people thought that Google has the answers, and it didn't seem that it always had the answers, I found that there is really a whole industry that was built. Now it has the name search engine optimization, but at that time there were just spammers who were able essentially to create the web, parts of the web in such a structure that Google and PageRank, the famous PageRank algorithm that Google had invented, would essentially be fooled. So why Google is giving us misinformation? The answer is because everybody wants to get their position at the top result. So this old man is looking for the meaning of life, and the kid says, well, if it's not on Google, it doesn't exist. The truth is that people have so much trust in search engines, and for good reasons. The vast majority of the time, we get good results. But if you don't eventually end up at the very top, you don't exist. So web spam is this effort to modify the structure of the web in such a way that when search engines are kind of indexing and cataloging the data, we'll get the impression that this is an important result and they will promote it. But that's not always the case. I spent some time actually studying the phenomenon, and much to my surprise, what I found was that the same techniques that propagandists are using in real life to confuse the society, web spammers are using to confuse the search engines. So that was one interesting thing. And at the same time, there was some kind of a joke going on with the kind of results that you could push on the top of Google. You may remember the miserable failure query. It became kind of very fashionable at some point. People used to make these kind of jokes. Some liberals in the mid-2000s, they started associating the term miserable failure with George W. Bush, who was the president of the US at that time. And it turns out, we know after the analysis, that it only took like 29 people creating an anchor text on some web page with the term miserable failure pointing to George W. Bush official page, and that was enough to bring it to the top. It was kind of really surprising how easy it would be to just move. Well, you pick any kind of unusual byword, a combination of two words, and you have you and your friends. I guess as we are here, we could agree on some term and create a Google bomb. Of course, the conservatives would not have any of this, so very quickly they started pushing Jimmy Carter and Michael Moore and Hillary Clinton all the way to the top. It was like, all the kind of interesting characters and important people were miserable failures in the US. There was a lot of complaining about that time, and it went on for a while. Even in 2009, you would do the search, that's in January, when Barack Obama was inaugurated, and miserable failure is targeting Obama. So it went on for quite a while. And you would say, okay, why was that the case? What should be done? Well, creating this kind of Google bombs was appearing to be a little bit like a joke. Maybe, look at what I can do, how I can ridicule you. And then the opposing team would do the same thing. And it did not seem to be such a huge term, though, you could argue that ridiculing the President of the United States is not necessarily the lightest thing you can do. But nevertheless, very shortly, people start using Google bombs to actually discredit their enemies. In 2004, in the elections 2004, the term waffles was associated with a candidate. That was John Kerry. At that time, he was considered not to be very stable in what he was claiming. The term more evil than Satan. You want to take a guess? What was the page you would find? Microsoft. Yeah, it was kind of a joke. If you were to look, the only reference of the term in the Bible is Satan, but people kind of appropriated to look at Microsoft. Again, for activism, we wanted to do a point about Egypt at that time. You would find derogatory comments about Egypt, Jew, the same thing, racist, and so on and so forth. And Google was defending its PageRank all this time, was resisting any attempt to actually mess up, because we said, look, we know that PageRank works. It works in almost all the cases. If that's what's given, that's what's given. We're not going to mess up with it. It is not in our policy to try to mess up with it. But it was getting a lot of slack about that. Now, these might be jokes, but we might end up at some point believing in lies. And the question is, okay, is it such a big deal if we believe a lie from time to time? What can happen? Well, maybe we will feel embarrassed for that. Psychologically, it's definitely something not good. Maybe we will end up using something like a useless health supplement, and it's going to cost us a while in terms of money, but not too much. Maybe we'll buy a bad car. Now it gets a little more serious, right? You don't like these people who sell you a bad car. That can cost you a little more. Maybe the stock that you bought, there's quite a bit of spamming actually to persuade people to buy a particular stock that it is not good. Now it gets a little more serious. Maybe you will choose the wrong treatment. There is quite a bit of misinformation about that. In particular, there are lots of conspiracy theories about cancer out there. So that gets much more serious. And of course, you might vote for the wrong candidate if the candidate is actually being badmouth, or there's lies spreading about this candidate. Has this happened in the past? Yes, it has. And it goes back to 2006 US elections, when a group of liberals decided to target about 50 Republican congressmen who were coming up for re-election. And they were so bold and proud that actually they recorded the whole thing on the internet. They created, this is part of the page My Direct Democracy, MyDD. Does not exist anymore, but you can find it on archive. And they were describing exactly what you do. Here is the list of the senators and congressmen we're targeting. We will associate these keywords with them, and we will create bombs, and we'll eventually make the whole thing work for us. Nobody knows whether that worked. We know that they did make this claim, and we know that they were able, according to their recording, to push negative articles about the different congressmen higher up. And Google, as an answer, kept kind of tweaking its search engine, kept saying, this is an article from 2007, say, look, we are actually get it right now. It's not just PageRank. It is actually 200 different signals that will get us the right answer. They were trying, but they were not succeeding very much. This is an article from 2010 where somebody found out, the New York Times in this case wrote the article in which some scammer would sell supposedly, fancy glasses that they were knockoffs and completely kind of second market glasses, and will get bad recommendations. People get really upset. But the more people were writing about this guy's business and they were blasting him about the bad glasses he was selling, the higher up would come in Google search, because he was getting more links pointing to it. So here I have the proverb in Greek. The word fame and infamy and advertisement really have the same ingredient. It is fame. Bad fame, good fame is all fame in some sense. So that was happening in business. However, when it comes to elections, Google would not take any of this kind of slack. So in the 2008 elections, the results you would get whenever you were looking for some kind of a candidate for the elections was not completely random. In fact, the first 5 results would be kind of the official results, what we call the above the fold. For those of you who know about, newspapers, is like what you see if you have not opened up your newspaper yet. So the first 5 ones essentially would give you official results. Will give you the campaign site of the candidate, will give you the Congress sites if this person is already elected, Wikipedia site, will give you also some kind of images from this person and so on and so forth. So it seems like Google was defending against spamming successfully. Nobody knows if in 2008 there was an effort to create this kind of Google bomb, but in 2010 we know that there was an effort actually to repeat the 2006 experiment, and Daily Kos came with a list and said, okay, here are the congressmen we will try to target this time around, and here is the sites we will try to promote and try to get this kind of negative published saying up. We did the search again, we found that Google would have none of that. You could not really get any of the negative results higher up. In fact, it seems like over 29 weeks, we measured what you would get for some of the candidates that they were targeted, and we saw no change. It seems like you will always get the same kind of official results. So it seems that things were working. How about in 2016? We did the experiment again last year. These are fresh off the press kind of results. What we find is that indeed, we actually searched for Google and Yahoo and Bing. I'll show you the Google and Yahoo results here. We found that actually the results were so stable in these 29 weeks from June all the way to November that you could even predict from week to week about 6 top results 75% of the time. So Google was kind of having not too much infiltration from organic data into the top. That was one thing that was keeping the data stable. The second was that Google and Yahoo and Bing and everybody else now has this kind of right-hand side box where you get a little preview about the candidate, and it is we're told that this is done through the knowledge graph. Supposedly they have their own kind of set of reliable information, and they would create this right-hand side box like that. So it seems that they are defending themselves quite well. Google is, Yahoo not as well. And unfortunately, the Bing results seem to be not very reliable that we collected, because as we were scraping the pages over the year, Bing changed the order in which they would give the results halfway, and we did not realize it on time, so we do not have reliable data. But it seems like, especially if we judge from the data we have about autocomplete, Yahoo and Bing are being spammed big time, but not Google. And Google, is kind of important because it has about 85% of the market. So it's important that they get it right. Now, I've been talking about the web, but you get misinformation also from social media. I like these being, Greek. This is one of these catchy headlines that sounds like, nowadays, sounds like fake news, right? People are served biscuits with cocaine, and this is what they look like. Somebody saw this kind of desserts and decided to make a joke. It seems to be coming out of a news organization. This is what we call today fake news, all right? So fake news started coming into the realm of social media. And we observed in the 2010 special elections, the first bombing that occurred on Twitter. And in the 2000 elections, there were some changes that happened just months before the elections that affected the first successful attempt to actually bomb social media, in this case, Twitter. So, and Google at the same time. You'll see what I talk about bombing both Google and Twitter. In October of 2009, Bing, and in December of 2009, Google decided to sprinkle their search results with real-time results. So in the third position, in the beginning they had news, and then they had 1, 2, 3. Then the position, it is really the third position because one, it has extra data there. They started putting live results from social media. So you would see what people were talking on Twitter at that time. And that was hitting in the third, very high visibility. And if you were to look at what you would see, this is for the page of Martha Coakley, who was their Democratic candidate for the special seat of the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Nobody would believe that in 2010 the Democrats would lose this seat. I mean, it is Massachusetts, a heavily Democratic state. Ted Kennedy was kind of an icon. The big issue was what we call today Obamacare, and that seat would actually solidify a filibuster proof of the deciding to adopt the healthcare reform. So it seems that the Republicans had no chance of actually doing anything. We didn't think so, but we started collecting data because in our research world, the big word was prediction. Social media will predict your elections. You may remember this, Washington Post and Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, they would have these kind of meters in which they will tell you who's winning based on the rumor that was happening in social media. We figure out, okay, if it's so easy to predict, let us predict ourselves. So we started collecting data. What we found is that the searches for the candidates that were Martha Coakley and Scott Brown were picking up just before the elections in Massachusetts. And we were wondering what were people finding as we were collecting the data. And what they were finding was mostly negative results for their Democratic candidate and positive results for the Republican candidate. So it seems that we could predict the elections. You see the Republican who eventually won seems like had quite a bit of visibility. And this is, as I said, in Google results. So we collected the data for the week before the elections, 200,000 tweets, and we found that 40% plus were retweets. At that time, we did not know exactly what to make of retweets. Nowadays, we know, yeah, of course, it's going to be a lot of retweets, because when you have retweets, kind of you indicate some agreement. So the more you get retweets means that the more people agreeing with you. So there is some kind of community building. But the big surprise is that 1 out of 3 tweets were repeat tweets. The younger of you probably have not seen anything like that. But back then, you could actually repeat the same tweet again and again and again on Twitter. That was not forbidden. And it seems like 32% was retweets. That was surprising. So first, with the retweets, we realized that actually, if you just look at the retweets, you can detect communities. So here you would see the smaller blue blob there. It is designed, the drawing is with force-directed drawing, so kind of figures out who is kind of retweeting each other more often. And that's the blue colored in the top. And there is a much larger one on the right-hand side, which turns out it is the conservative, but the Tea Party had its own kind of subcategories in there. Nevertheless, they were behaving in a very similar way. So indeed, we found that you could detect the affiliation and communities, and this is something I'll show you later on with the new tools that we have, Twitter Trails, that this is something you can see on a regular basis. In fact, when you don't see it, something dangerous might be happening. So what's happening with the retweets? Imagine that you're following somebody and this person keeps repeating the same tweet. And since you're following this person, you see it all the time. It must be really annoying why they're telling you the same thing again and again and again. Like, well, it turns out that what they were trying to do, and we know that because actually we followed their discussions because they were encouraging other people to do that, they were launching a Google bomb using Twitter. Because Google was putting in the third position the Twitter results, you didn't have to bomb Google. You could essentially keep repeating the same tweets on Twitter, so that just before the elections, you would get Twitter, Google results, which did matter. Twitter at that time was in 8% of the population, was not very visible. But you were getting high exposure by attacking Twitter. That was pretty interesting. There are some results that came out of this work that I think. Number one, Google took out the real-time and Bing, the real-time search results. You will not see it anymore. In the beginning, they had it in a sidebar that you had to click. Later on, they removed them completely. Now you cannot find real-time almost in all but one case. The other thing that happened, Twitter forbade the repeat tweets. Now, if you keep trying to repeat something, Twitter will not let you, will kind of tell you, you've already said so. So a couple of results, I think, that came out of this work. It's not that Google or Twitter ever told me, yeah, it's because of your work that we did that, but the timing is suspicious, and I would like to take the credit. But we found some more kind of foul plays. The next one, we call it prefabricated tweet factory. So a prefabricated tweet factory is the following. You want to create a sense of a grassroots effort to put pressure, let's say, on somebody. It's not easy to get organized with a lot of people. However, what you could do is have somebody, in this case, the authors of the Patriot Action Network, who would come on a daily basis, and they will create lists, daily lists of tweets. So if you like the cause, so if you were, let's say, a conservative at that time, all you had to do is go there, pick up a list of tweets. They're all phrased differently. So they will all appear as if they're coming, really from a grassroots organization, and you would start sending the tweets and to Twitter, to Google, to anybody. It would look as a large number of people are just really upset. And what they were upset with, they were upset with the journalists. They were complaining to the journalists. So they were kind of sending this as a reply to journalists, saying, do your job, we know what you're doing, you know what you're not fair, we have you in our target. And this is the kind of things they were pointing. Do your job, we are not silent any longer, you are corrupt. And so you can recognize some of the names of local Kate Courage, I see here, CBS, Evening News, that they were attacking. So for journalists, this must be really distressing if you think you're doing your job and suddenly it seems that you're getting 1,000 tweets all appear apparently kind of different, saying that you're not doing your job. Maybe we need to interview some of the journalists to find out how they felt, because we know who they are. So that was the second kind of foul play that we found. This was a very good set of data that we collected, I have to say. There was yet a third way of making a mess with data, and this is what we call the first electoral Twitter bomb, something that nowadays happens more and more often. So we observed that there were 9 accounts that were created the day before the elections in a short period of time, and within 138 minutes, they started sending a lot of replies to other users. And the tweets were like that. They were looking at a different account, and they had the message, and they had the URL, and time and again. Now, here's how the thing works, because this is a very powerful technique that I think it's important to understand it, because it's the same technique that was used to create fake news on Facebook in the last elections. And it is, upsetting that we knew about that back in 2010, and nothing happened until, it hit Facebook. So what these spammers did was the following. They started following the discussion about the Massachusetts election several hours of that day. Knowing who was interested in that, they recorded their names, their handles, and then they started sending them replies, personal replies, as if they had some discussion, pointing to a particular website, claiming that Martha Coakley really was saying that Catholics should not become doctors. Complete lie, kind of a fake news type of thing, but it was kind of propaganda. They only lasted for 138 minutes because the creation was not very sophisticated. You could think of them as bots, what we call tweet bots. but it could be that they were actually actual humans. They were sent in like 1 per minute. So it's something that you can actually do it by typing. It's not necessarily, though chances are they wrote a program. But they had such a predictable pattern that Twitter figured them out and shut them down. Here's the pattern from their tweeting, and you could see that kind of they all behave the same way. Maybe half of them were bots and half of them were humans. We're gone. So what were they saying? We're saying that Martha Coakley said it. They had created a website which had this kind of propaganda, and then they started sending to particular people. This is targeted audience. This is people who were interested in the elections. Some of them, did not like what they hear. Others, they liked it and they retweeted. So they were able, essentially, within a few hours and up until the day of the election, to reach 61,000 accounts for something that it is zero cost and very fast to do. After that, these kind of tweet bots became much more sophisticated. Now it's not that easy to detect them because the pattern is not as well. So who was behind that? In the beginning, we couldn't see, but eventually they signed their page. As we were ready to publish the paper 3 months later, we go to visit, just take a snapshot, and suddenly we see, gee, they have a signature. And the signature was pointing to America Future Fund. We tried to find out who are they. Turns out that it is a Republican group from Iowa who was not known actually because they had attacked Kerry in 2004 with the Swift boat story, and even they had attacked Michael Dukakis with the Willie Horton case, if you're familiar with his story. So they go way back, and it was like, here is the next version that we're doing. They went from printed press to TV, now to cyber web. So 3 different ways to attack, and here is how they did it. As I said, they register a domain, they create some anonymous accounts, then they identified the community who were interested in the audience, so in the topic, not kind of spreading the words left and right, but figuring out who might be more willing to listen to it. Essentially, figuring out a community who would retweet, and eventually this community would spread the word. Let at the end the word spread. And I put that down because looking at the work that Craig Silverman from BuzzFeed has done, we see that actually the current attack with fake news on the last elections had exactly the same pattern. And it was like, oh my God, this is so much. Craig has several articles in which he is describing that. They registered some domains in which they had the propaganda they wanted to create. They created a bunch of fictitious Facebook accounts. Then they identified groups. They started putting these accounts onto Hispanics for Trump or San Diego Democrat. And then they targeted these members in the Facebook group and waited for people to keep sharing. And eventually, it had so much attention. So it seems like this is a technique that has worked. If you want to avoid having a repetition of this kind of problem in the future, you need somehow to disrupt this chain, and at least you will solve that particular problem because problems are everywhere. So what have we done since then about that? Since the kind of Twitter bombs and the Google bombs that we discovered, we decided to create a tool to investigate rumors as they appear. So what kind of rumors we investigated? In the beginning, we're looking for generic rumors. There was no election times. So here is somebody tweeting that there is an airplane off the Canary Islands. This is happening just a week after we had the plane of Malaysian Airlines had disappeared, and people were very upset about that. Here is another, somebody tries to get into the London tubes and he hears that they're terrorists, what people are talking about that. Somebody says that a girl, 9 years old, kills gun instructor. I thought that's certainly fake news. Turns out it's not fake news. It's not that easy to figure out just by reading something. Well, BBC in this case probably was a good indication that they had done their job. Religious kind of spam. Here is an account of ancient Christianity. We discovered yet another Jesus miracle. Read all about it. Here, or there is something missing from Fort Carson, but it seems like it's not a nuclear weapon. Oh, thank God. lately, in the last elections, of course, the kind of things that we were more interested in investigating were related to the elections, and we have investigated about 500 rumors so far. So some of them are kind of funny. Here is a rumor that some Dominican newspaper uses picture of Baldwin instead of Trump. Is that so, really? That Tillerson had used an alias to communicate in Exxon. The president talking about the wiretapping by Obama, kind of more visible rumors, some of them true, some of them not. Pizzagate, and this particular tweet that I'm showing you here has instructions about how to promote Pizzagate. It is a sequence of tweets and says, here's what you have to do. Follow these instructions. Here is that supposedly Hillary's State Department lost $6 billion, lots of money. Here is $500 billion, if $6 billion were not enough, were found by Ben Carson at HUD. That's good change, $500 billion, Are they really true? So what do we do? Well, let's say you want to investigate a rumor on Twitter. Unfortunately, we only do it on Twitter because you cannot get data from Facebook. We would love to, but Facebook has played, the quiet duck here. It's like, oh, nothing's happening this way until people discover it the hard way. You cannot, unless you work for Facebook, you cannot find data from them. So how do we do this? How does Twitter trade works? You start by getting a group of keywords that would tell you what you want to investigate. And the keywords might be specific enough to investigate a rumor, a claim, or could be, let's say, a meme, one of the hashtags. You want to see what people are saying in general. How you select the hashtag is the most important thing in the process. And why do we think that this kind of procedure works? What we do eventually is that we try to see how the crowd reacts to the rumor. Because you will always find a rumor, you always find a tweet that looks outrageous. But how prevalent is this? Are there many people who believe that? Is it something that's all over the place? People will tell you, oh, it's all over the internet, which means usually, I saw it. But we want to see, and is it propagating within an open environment in which people might be finding at random about that, or it is in an echo chamber where only a specific group of people listens to it. So what data can we tell about the rumor? The first thing that happens, as I said, is that you give the keywords and then everything happens automatically. And what happens automatically? You find out who was the originator and the first poster of the rumor. So you can see where it started, and that might give you some information. We're thinking that this is a tool that in particular journalists might like, because let's say you would like to investigate something that you hear, you don't want to start doing your own search, reading everything that's out there. Maybe you could use this to find out who started it. When did the story break? Is it kind of a quiet story, or there was a point in which things became more prominent? Is it still spreading as I'm doing the investigation, or it is kind of something that ended? Who are the main propagators of the story? Can I identify the people who seem to be more prominent in doing that? Is there a skepticism in the story? Is everybody kind of buying the story, or there are tweets that this indicate skepticism? And by skepticism, we're just having a very, very simple technique. We're just looking about words that indicate doubt, like, how can you tell? Not sure it's like that. Who told you? Where do you get the picture? Who else says that? Just keyword searching, nothing sophisticated, even though we would like to have more sophisticated. And who are the main actors according to the audience? According to the audience, that is, we have devised a new way of looking at the data, which is not really the retweet network, but it is the co-retweeted network. So according to others, how those who are very active look like. That way you can detect communities not as people declare themselves to be, but as the audience sees them. So I'll show you more about that. When you're going to Twitter Trails, you will get, according to the story, first a little snippet will tell you what's the title and what was the initial tweet that we used in order to do the investigation. and whether it is a meme. In this case, the first is Pizzagate, it's just a meme. The second one, it's about a claim that Trump supporters wave flags that look like the Russian flag, written with the word Trump on it. Are you serious? You would get some indication whether this is true or false. The system will look at how the crowd behaves, and with some kind of ML decision will tell you what's the probability that this claim is true. I'll show you how that works. So first, the originator. You're looking at the sequence, the timing of when the rumor seems to have started, and you can check to see what was the very first tweet that had in the data you have collected. One thing to keep in mind is that we do not have any special agreement with Twitter, so we can only use the search API, and so reliably look back 1 week. And look further back if there are any retweets from further back in time. If we had access to the Twitter data, we could have a much more detailed picture. So here is where it seems to be the first tweet that started the rumor of Pizzagate. Jolly old Archer is a known troll that seems to is coming up with a story. This is the backroom of Comet Ping Pong. Naked children holding a severe head and stuff like that. And another case is the claim that Obama tapped Trump Tower during the election. Who said that? It turns out that several days before, you could see the dates there. The first for the Pizzagate in our data is 6th of November. For the Obama tapped Trump Tower, it is the 15th of February, and turns out is something that calls themselves Trump Super PAC. Moving on, the second thing is, where was the burst of the spreading? When kind of the story became more prominent? So here is about the Pizzagate. Here is where the tweets became kind of more prominent. Every circle is the potential of this account to have visibility. It is a logarithmic size of the number of followers that this person has. So the height is how many times it was retweeted. So this particular tweet, for example, it had about 2,500 favorites and 3,000 retweets. So it is in that spot. It is above 3,000. And the density will tell you, as you can see, the density will tell you how often people were retweeting as it was becoming prominent. So it is not when it started, but it was when the news kind of broke and became big news. Big surprise there. The most prominent person is a Turkish journalist who's commenting about the Pizzagate. Turns out that there was a scandal with orphan children in Turkey that supposedly were abused, and people were really upset with that. And what he says is like, yeah, we're talking about our abuses, but look what happens in America, They're doing all of these things. And it's like, okay, interesting. How did he find out about these things? All of these tweets that are coming before that, and I can show you how I can see all of these things, come from a troll that turns out started writing in Turkish in a while. So this troll called Pizzagate started writing time and again and again and again, just before this eventually journalist picked up the story and thought, what the heck. Eventually this particular troll was shut down, but as he's almost getting ready to shut down, he says, oh, they're gonna censor us. The next thing I will show you is kind of who was the audience. This big blob there tells you that they were about 4,500 people retweeting to each other the story. There were more than 1,100,000 retweets about the story. So this is, within this circle, this was a big, big story, and people were getting upset. Not surprising that somebody got so upset at the end that decided to take the gun and try to figure it out. Here is the Co-Retweeted graph of the Syria hoax. There was this hashtag about Syria hoax that started as the chemical attack on the Syrian town happened a few days ago, and we actually took a snapshot of what the dialogue was looking like before the attack and after the attack. So this is the Syria hoax attack. As you can see, they are different groups. There is a cyan group that has 343 nodes, and what you can see here is the words that appear more often in the profiles of people in this group. So the most common word, so it's like a word cloud, the most common word in this cyan group is the word MAGA. M-A-G-A, Make America Great Again. It's a signature that these are pro-Trump. The red one that you can see, it's a smaller one up there. I'll show you later on in a second, actually, live. It has as a common keyword the resistance. So there is a kind of disagreement there. So in the propagation graph, whenever we have tweets that they have almost identical content, we give it the same color. So here you can see some propagation, but you can see all the propagation here has the same color, means that people just repeat the things. This is usually an indication of a bot. A bot would usually, or a collection of bots would just take the same text and retweet it. Maybe they will change one thing or another, but pretty much we will end up figuring out what was the meaning, the kind of content, if it is identical. About Ben Carson discovering $500 billion, all of them have the same color. So we can detect this kind of simple things. All right, I will keep moving. In the Twitter trails, we have this kind of one-liners, and based on the ratio of spreading versus skepticism, we will have an indication whether it is likely true or false according to the audience. When you're collecting the data, what we have observed is that the true and the false rumors usually have a different signature. Here are a comparative study of two rumors about the same thing. One is a false rumor, the other is a true rumor. If you may remember, back in October 2015, there were some rumors initially that Turkey shot down a Russian jet. The audience did not much believe it. You can see the skepticism is dubious for that. A month later, on November, actually Turkey did shoot down a Russian plane, and you can see the signature is different at that time. There's much less skepticism. It's undisputed. The spreading is higher as well. So what we have observed in general is that you could get a sense of what the audience thinks about the spreading of the rumor by looking at your stories. So here we have this simple graph. It has the spreading in one axis and the skepticism in the other. And the way we measure the spreading is the same way in academia we measure publication reach. It's the H index. We consider every tweet to be a publication. Whenever you get a retweet, you get more reference point. So eventually it is, we have borrowed all of these really from library science. And on the horizontal is the skepticism, is the ratio of negating tweets versus full tweets. So we have, as I said, claims and events. I can silence the events to see what the claims look like. And if I differentiate of those that we have data to tell us that indeed they were true or false, here is what we look at. The false rumors seem to have low spreading and high skepticism, by and large, not everything. And the true ones have low skepticism and high spread. So it seems that there is a signal there, and we can see which ones do not behave like that. Yes? I have a conjecture which says on Twitter, claims with high skepticism and low spread are more likely to be false, and those that they are lower skepticism and higher spread look like to be true. And why do I say on Twitter and I do not say, in other means? It seems, and here's how successful we are essentially in figuring out whether something it is true or false based on the data we have collected. Naive Bayes gives us a 92% signal that can distinguish between true and false. It's quite strong, and others are also giving good. So why not Facebook? Well, we cannot have data from Facebook, but researchers in Facebook do have. And a couple of years ago, this was this well-known paper called Rumor Cascades. People within Facebook took a look and saw what happens. And what they found is that rumors almost never die on Facebook. And why is that? In my opinion, it is because on Facebook, if you make a claim, it comes in high real estate. You get a lot of space. You get big text. You get a picture. Anybody who says that's bullshit, not so, stuff like that, will just get a comment. And very soon, you will not even see the comments. So we have seen many, many cases in which, somebody in comment like 5 will say, oh my God, this is terrible, I'm telling all my friends. And comment number 4 and number 3 says, that's bullshit, here is bullshit, that's bullshit. People don't. On Twitter, that's not the case. On Twitter, you get the same real estate if you just make a claim or you make a counterclaim. So if you do a search, you are bound to see about the same space. I think the interface has a role to play. In fact, here is proof by example. My favorite story about mourners getting cocaine, that was in 2011. That was in 2014. Somebody's excited. Number 2015, and probably it's still running. I can probably, start spreading the rumor again. It seems like it will come down again. So, how do we deal with the problem? Here is what you came for. You would like to know the answer. A piece of software that says, just click here and get me the answer. Not really. Not really, because how do we know what we know? Why we believe things? Well, there is an education that we have gone through, there is society we have gone through, but usually we believe because of extrinsic reasons. That is, we trust who says that. That was the word of my father. The newspaper said that, it must be true. And people use it a lot. We also have our own intrinsic reasons. My own experience told me so, in which case I will trust my experience usually. It's also our abilities to think critically. You hear that all the time, but what does it mean to think critically? It means really something not easy. It means that you can apply the scientific method in your thinking. In other words, you have to figure out exactly what is it that you try to find the answer of. And even write it down if it's possible. And then look for evidence both in favor and against. Because usually people will just formulate a hypothesis and then will just look for evidence that supports it. The moment they see it, that's it. They will not look further than that. But that's not what happens. The most difficult thing is know yourself. This, written in Greek, ancient Greek, says gnothi safton, know yourself, which is really tricky because took me 50 years to realize that we don't know ourselves very well. How do we know? Well, let's think about the things that we know, supposedly. Things that we learn like when we were children. There are a lot of lies out there that we believe because we learned them when we were children. Things we remember incorrectly. We tend to believe that memory is a database, and if I remember something, it must be like that. It turns out that we recreate memories on the fly every time. So you can implant memories to people if you keep repeating them. In fact, propagandists know that, and they will keep repeating something to you, and eventually you will believe it. We saw that in the last elections. Things we misunderstood. We thought we heard that, and we heard something very different, but since we thought we heard it, we try to do pattern matching, and it does not work very well. Also, we have lots of thoughts that were not kind of in the clear. Under the influence of substances, we may have thoughts. Under fear, anger, passion, and desire. Some of the biggest decisions we make in our lives are taken under fear, anger, passion, and desire, you may have heard. Using illogical deductions, we will kind of take step 1, 2, 3, jump number 4, and just go to the conclusion. People do it all the time. Lack of sleep. You may have mental illnesses, unfortunately. I'm sure that if you start looking around to people that you have observed other examples of brain not working very well. Whose fault is it? All of them. It's part of the problem we have with the evolution. Are we really stupid? No. But our brain is really not something that came in a brand new box, but it is a sequence of the evolution of the lizard brain, of the mammal brain, of the huge brain that humans have right now. And the fact that it is huge is part of the problem. Because you see, being so large means that it needs a lot of energy to work. So my father used to joke for me every time, he would see me studying. I'm blasting my father today. He would see me studying, and I would get up and I was tired and say, why are you tired? Were you digging in the yard? I'm tired that I was digging out there, but you were sitting down. Well, using this huge frontal cortex is very tiring. And because it is very tiring, really, we try to avoid doing it. We are thinking lazy. Sorry to break the news, but really people try to avoid thinking every time they can. In fact, lots of our stereotypes that we use is because we try to avoid thinking. So it's a complicated and impressive instrument, that brain, that's not perfect. It has limitations. It is limited by our feelings, our senses, our environment. It also needs to feel that it is in control, so we try to find a reason behind anything we observe. Conspiracy theories is based exactly on this problem. We see something, we don't want to believe that it is random, therefore we have to discover a reason and we can invent reasons. So it takes energy. Energy is dear. We try to avoid using this energy and we don't use this energy. So we're using heuristics. And so we will fall for fake news. We look at something, it sounds right because we already believe something like that. Oh my God, I'm absolutely right, I will retweet it. There is some famous research that has been done in which the same group of people who believed on a particular, different sides of a particular theory was given the very same evidence, and the ones who used to believe A, after seeing the evidence would believe A even more strongly, and the ones who believe not A, after seeing the very same evidence, we believe not A even more strongly. We are picking the evidence we want, and we will promote that. I wish I could tell you Twitter Trails is the answer to everything. Just go there, click the answer, and we'll tell you. It's not the case. We need to have lots of pieces in place, like dependable, independent, experienced, educated, smart crowd that will evaluate that. Investigative journalists most of the time are part of this crowd, but not always, because they can also get absorbed into that. I think academic librarians are people that actually can make a difference, because their whole education is actually part of evaluating information. Financial incentives have to be dismissed, and there is quite a few steps nowadays from Google and Facebook to do that. Cut the money to those Macedonian or Georgian youth, 16-year-olds that makes like $3,000 a day by just feeding us lies. Yeah, user interface might be important, and using the scientific method is important, and the hardest of all, know yourself. Because if you are participating in an echo chamber, you will probably be fooled. So technology can help, but it's not going to give you all the answer. Thank you very much. And these are my collaborators. If you get the impression that I did all myself, it's fake. It's mostly the work of these people. Thank you.